How NVR works. NVR means network video recorder. It receives streams from camera over the IP network. Stream is already compressed and encrypted. So for NVR to record the camera, it requires to have the camera password and login. Cameras are recorded on a hard drive as channels. At the same time, live view of cameras can be viewed on the screen. Cameras can be also streamed from NVR to external devices like apps, computers, some external storage or monitoring station. Thank you. Hi, let's talk about network video recorder types. First, we can have NVRs and VMS. NVR, network video recorder, and VMS, video management software. Example of such a software would be Milestone, Hikvision IVMS 4200, and basically software which can install on a computer, which can manage all the video. VMS can work with standalone NVRs, and it's like similar to having an app on your phone. So VMS can be as additional thing, or could be as an and that's in case of the IVMS 4200 for Hikvision, or it could be like NVR on the PC, which could be Milestone. In that case, Milestone is that type of software. You have server, you have client, and they work together. You're not using embedded NVRs in there. That's one type. As I said, VMS can work with servers and clients. One computer works as a server and records all the cameras. Another computer works as a client, so you can access, manage cameras recordings from multiple locations. This type of system is usually used for large systems, tens of hundreds of cameras. Then we have standalone NVRs, and the first type is the one I already talked about in the section about DVRs, which is hybrid DVR. Digital video recorder. In many DVRs you can also add IP cameras. In some of them, full hybrid, you can make every channel, every camera, an IP camera by going to camera menu. So in some of them you can add only a few, but in a full hybrid you can change every single camera into the IP camera. So it's like having DVR and NVR in one box. Here I have an example of the hybrid. I'm just guessing that's a hybrid, but it will look more or less like that. So you have your HD CCTV inputs, you have your USB, you have a HDMI, VGA, and you have a LAN connection. RS485, which will be for PTZ mostly, and your connection to your power supply, power on off, and alarms in and out. So, as you can see, most of them they look the same, but features might be slightly different, may have slightly better parameters, like for instance they can handle much higher resolutions or more cameras, or have additional features like some intelligent features. Anyway, that's a hybrid. NVR with camera ports. So this is basically an NVR with a built-in network PoE switch. So each camera can be connected to its own port with a predetermined IP address, different than the office network. The above is security feature. It makes more difficult to hack such a camera. And that's an example. So you have your network cameras there. So 1, 2, 3, 8, so it's 24 cameras. Each camera has its own port, and each of those ports has assigned channel usually. So when you're connecting and setting up, and you're connecting your camera to one of those ports, you have to know which port is which channel to set it up properly inside the DVR. Those channels are numbered, same as those ports. Here is your LAN cable for the office network. So this is the section for CCTV, and this is where that NVR connects to the rest of the world through the office network. You have your USB, you have a VGA, two HDMI cables, and you can have external SATA as well, and a power cable. So NVR with camera ports, as in that picture. We'll also have regular network ports, so it can be connected to the office network. Typically, it will have 4, 8, or 16 channels, or more. But 4, 8, and 16 probably would be 4, 8, 16 would be the most typical. NVR with 2 network ports, similar to the above, but there's only one. So 2 network ports, but one for cameras and one for office. It has no built-in PoE switch, so you have to buy a switch and install it. As in previous example, it will use 2 different IP ranges, subnets, one for cameras, one for office. And there is an example of such a back of such a NVR. So LAN 1, LAN 2, HDMI, USB, VGA, RS485 for the PTZ, alarms, and the power. And then you have NVRs with 1 port. It's similar like previous, just as 1 port for both office and the cameras. And there you have an example. So I have a VGA, HDMI, LAN, power. Some small ones. It's one of the small ones probably. Sorry. So thank you. Hi. NVR hardware setup. That setup obviously is good for any NVR. You connect your Ethernet cable from your switch to the back of your NVR. It will go into the single Ethernet port if you have NVR with the PoE switch, or single network port NVR, and we'll explain that later also, or to the one of 2 LAN ports on the 2 network NVR manual, which tell you to which, because one LAN port is for the cameras and the second is the one for the office network. You connect your VGA and HDMI cable to the monitor. Obviously you want to use HDMI because you will get a much better quality, much higher resolution of the picture. You make sure that your monitor has a right input selected. It's usually called source on the monitor. So make sure often it's a VGA, HDMI 1, HDMI 2, and so on. So you have to pick the right one. Connect your mouse to the USB port. On the front or back of your NVR, connect NVR power cable, power up NVR. Here you have an NVR with 2 LAN ports, LAN 1, LAN 2. You have a VGA, USB, HDMI, some audio, power connection, power switch, RS485. RS485 usually will be used for the PTZ camera, or you have alarms and alarms out. Alarms out will be, you could set up different events as well in the DVR, like movement, or some, if it's intelligent, you can use somebody crossing some line or something like that. That's a 2 LAN NVR. As I said, I explained before, 1 LAN is for cameras only, and the second is for connecting to the office network. It's a security feature. Cameras are separated from the office network. During the initial setup of the NVR, typically it will ask you for a password, for a new password, because it will have some default password. Never you have to always set up date and time, and time zone, daytime, daylight savings, and a network time protocol. That's very important. Same as I said about the cameras, IP cameras. That's an example of some, I think it was Hikvision, some older version where you create new passwords. And that's creating your time zone. As you can see, there's a Chinese time zone which you have to change to whatever is your time zone, because then it will be a problem. So you're not only setting system time and system date, but you also setting time zone. Again, you set up your office network. You set up IP address, subnet mask, and a gateway, if you know them. If you don't know them, follow the steps on the next slide. In most cases, your NVR will have all the ports already set. I mean the IP TCP ports. Do not change them at this stage unless you know what you're doing. And there's your network setting, and you can see there's your DHCP. So as I explained before, and I can explain again, probably it's on the next one. Yeah, so if you know all IP addresses already in use, just pick one that's free. If you do not know what is in use, to initially find the IP address subnet, type in ipconfig in a command prompt on your computer laptop which is already connected to the network. Run IP scanner and on your subnet and discover what IP addresses are in use and which are free. Another way to get your proper IP address is to set NVR to DHCP initially. And again, I go there back to just show you. See, so you tick in that box, and what will happen? NVR will acquire the IP address, subnet, and a default gateway. Once you've done that, you can untick it and save. The save usually will be at the end. Sometimes it's on every screen, sometimes it's at the end of the initial setup. So as I explained, you don't want your NVR to be on the DHCP, Dynamic Host Configuration Protocol, as it may create connectivity problems with external access, like apps, some computers, or monitoring station. Some NVRs may ask you to initialize hard drives. So for instance, it's pretty common in Hikvision. If it is not coming with Hikvision, if it's not coming with the hard drive, you have to install that hard drive, connect the SATA cable, and connect the power cable inside the NVR for the hard drive, and then you have to power up, and it will ask you to initialize the hard drive. Just follow the steps. For instance, for ISO time, it doesn't ask to initialize. And if you have NVR already with hard drives, probably will not ask you for that anyway. Most of NVRs will ask you to add cameras in the initial process. Do not do that. And you will add cameras later, because they must be programmed properly before adding. And that's important, because as you remember, we have to program IP addresses, we have to set video parameters, we have to set date, time, and time zone. So that's good few settings. It's better to do them from the laptop. You can do this from the from some tool, but from the laptop is probably the best. But anyway, tool would be on the laptop anyway. Some NVRs may ask you to set recording schedule and video quality. You can do that, unless it requires you to add cameras first. so you can skip it and do this later. Due to high capacity for hard drives, I will usually set continuous recording 24/7 in 99% of installations. No need for motion or schedule. You must set a mainstream and a substream. Mainstream is what you're recording on hard drive, and I'm usually trying to set what customer requires, and I'm trying to use maximum what camera can give me if possible. But a lot of cases it's just 1920 by 1080, 2515 frames per second, and constant bitrate 2048 kilobits. Substream, which is for streaming, I will set much smaller than the mainstream. 7.4 by 480, 1510 frames per second, constant bitrate 1024, for instance. Obviously you can set different things depending on the cameras you are using. I'm more or less, let's say, average what I would be setting, and for camera like 1920 by 1080. Thank you. Hi. In this section we will be adding cameras to the NVR, and a lot of steps which we have in this we already talked about. So again, before you add any IP cameras, you have to program those IP cameras first. Each camera is supposed to have default password. Usually each camera has a default password, time, and IP. You must program them properly. So you will need your PoE switch, laptop computer set in the default camera IP range. Once you have it, you program those cameras. You connect cameras to the switch. You connect camera to the switch one at a time. You open Internet Explorer or Chrome browser, type address, default address of the camera, and program it. You will have a login screen, similar like in the NVR case, and you will be forced to create your password. Make sure that you have a note of that password. After that, you set up date, time zone, DST, and NTP, and then you can go to video section, similar like in NVR, and set up mainstream and substream. Make sure that you have the same settings as in NVR, so you don't go higher than NVR, because NVR will not be able to process that. As the last step, you set up IP address, subnet mask, and gateway from the range which was programmed in the NVR. Once you do that and you click save, you will lose connection with the camera because your IP has changed. And make sure that each camera has its own IP, unique IP. With NVR, which have those built-in switches, you will have slightly different rules for adding cameras. Because IP range is usually predefined, each input port has a channel number. You have to check that in manual. So when you plug in the camera to one of the ports at the back, you must know the channel number to which you are adding camera. The rest is the same as for other NVRs. Most time we add cameras in camera menu. Well, those menus can be named differently in different NVRs, but usually it's something called camera menu, and then you use something which is called custom add. You need camera IP, login, and password, and you also need a camera protocol and port. So when you're setting up camera, make sure that you make a note what the port is and what the protocol is. Typically, as protocol, if you're working with Hikvision, you will be setting Hikvision protocol. If you're working with let's say IC lead time, you'll be setting their protocol. Or you can use OnViv, which is common for practically every make of the camera and an NVR. Thank you. Hi, let's talk about HD and analog cameras. We can start from the resolution point of view. As you remember from at least few lessons in this course, the old analog cameras had very low resolution, and if you remember that shopping center picture, typical resolutions for old analog was CIF 352 by 240 pixels, and the maximum you could get was D1, which was 704 by 480. Then newer cameras came in, and it's the next one is not really HD, but it's higher than the D1, has a better resolution. It's 960 by 480. In general, when you replacing old cameras, you have to make sure that your DVR can handle certain sizes. So for instance, if you had old analog DVR working with analog cameras, and currently when you're trying to install a new camera because let's say some camera broke, you cannot really get those old cameras with this resolution like 704 or 352. Typically what you're getting now is the format 960. It's probably the smallest you can get. Also, you have to remember that those 720p or 1080p, they're also analog, just HD. So you have to make sure that your old DVR actually can handle those newer cameras, or you may want just to replace the DVR. So let's go again to those resolutions. So as I said, these are the old ones. You may still find such a camera somewhere installed, but you cannot buy the new ones really. Then from the new cameras, you may get some of them with that. There are cameras called 4-in-1, which have 3 different HD resolutions, and typically this resolution as well, so you can switch, but no, not always. Very often the old DVR will not work even with that. So you have to just make sure that you know what you're doing when you're replacing cameras. So going farther, we can have much higher resolutions with HD. We can have 3 megapixels, 4 megapixels, 5 megapixels, as far as 8 megapixels, and which is obviously 4K. And basically that's what you're getting. So you're getting similar quality like IP, just that picture is not compressed, not encrypted, goes over coax, and that's it. And you need obviously power supply for the camera. Thank you. Just a moment ago we were talking about resolutions for HD cameras and analog cameras, and with resolutions will be also what is connected with resolutions are protocols, a type where the way the picture is coded. So there are multiple formats which are being used currently, and the one called CVBS is the one which can produce 960 pixels, and it's a kind of old analog standard, just higher. SDI is a serial digital interface. SDI is a high definition, and it's the only digital out of all those 4 here. It came from the TV background and was very good for transmitting picture on short distances. Unfortunately, it's limited to 100 meters, which is not really good for the HD CCTV. Then another format which is very popular, probably the most popular, is TVI, a high definition, called Transport Video Interface. Again, it goes over coax. It is analog HD. It's being used by Hikvision. It's very popular in US. That's it. Another format is CVI. It's another high definition analog. It stands for Composite Video Interface. It's popular in China, but not really in United States. It's used by Dahua. At least one of, there will be more, but definitely Dahua is using that. Another format is AHD, which stands for Analog HD, although all of them except SDI are Analog HD, and CVBS is not really HD. AHD is popular in Korea and Japan. I'm not sure which, I don't remember now which producer is using that. But at the same time, as you remember, I said some of the cameras, a lot of cameras which you're getting, first of all, DVRs and NVRs. DVRs, most of them can handle all the formats. All of those are mentioned, including all the analog, which I mean the small CIV or D1. And then there are those cameras which are in 4 formats, and you can switch between them. In general, TVI, CVI, and AHD provide almost the same image quality and features. So you can get 2, 3, 4, 5, or 8 megapixels resolution. You can get video transmission for up to 500 meters, and SDI is only 100. Wide dynamic range, good digital noise reduction, and they work with the low light. And as I said before, in other lessons, all those new modern cameras, they already have a built-in infrared. Thank you. Hi. Cables for the HD and analog cameras. The most used cable is coax RG59. It's a thick cable which consists of inner insulated core of stranded or solid wire and surrounded with wire braids. It is durable, versatile, provides good distance. It's reliable but costly. Another one is BNC cable, thin coax. It simplifies installation but goes on much shorter distances. RG59 can go around 200 meters, where this one only 90. That's more or less how the BNC would look like, and that's when you strip RG59, that's how it looks like. So as I said, coax RG59 is the most commonly used CCTV cable, and you should select the one which has a copper, solid copper internal core and 95% copper plating. The impedance of CCTV cameras is 75 ohms, so you must pick the cable which has 75 ohms. And just remember, it's not a resistance, it's an impedance. You can run analog CCTV via coax up to 200 meters. You can also use RG6, but it's more, and it can go farther, go for longer distances without the video loss, but it's thicker, very difficult to install, difficult to crimp, and also more expensive. You can also run CCTV, analog HD CCTV on twisted pair cables. Basically, such a cable comprises of 2 insulated copper wires that are twisted around each other. You can have a belt-on cable, Cat5 cable. Belt-on cable may provide good signal integrity and safety because it can be shielded and grounded. But using this type of cable requires use of additional equipment to transform coax signal to twisted pair and back, and because it's different impedance. And example of that equipment are balloons. It's a simple passive balloons. There's a simple piece of equipment. You can run analog CCTV via Cat5 for up to 1000 meters, which is a big difference comparing with 200 on RG59. although still I probably wouldn't run that long. And when running cables of any kind, you have to make sure they don't run along the power lines, don't cross them too often, and so on. Another cable with different names for it. We call it a shotgun cable because it looks a little bit like a double barrel. And for instance, could be different types of cable, but mostly you can find here, and probably UK as well, I'm not sure about US, you can find RG59 with the attached power cable. And simplifies and reduces workload during the installation, because you can run power cable from the location where the DVR is, and you can have then power supply, the one with multiple fuses, one fuse per camera. Obviously, if you're using RG59, you have to crimp the cable. You have to terminate the cable. So that's your BNC connector, with which you terminate RG59, and that's a crimper tool. It's exactly the one I have. And basically that's it. Thank you. Hi, let's talk about the DVRs. We have very few DVR types in general. One of them will be embedded DVR. This is a standalone device that records analog HD CCTV cameras on a local hard drive, and that happens after compression. So all the signal goes through the coaxial cable, comes to the DVR, and then is being compressed and recorded. Embedded DVRs use proprietary operating systems that is stored in a chip. This makes it resistant to viruses and hackers, because there's no basically direct access from the internet to this part of the DVR. There's also something what is called hybrid embedded DVRs. This type of DVR can also record IP cameras. In short, it is DVR and NVR in one. There are also DVRs which are PC based. A PC based DVR is a software installed on a PC. It requires a video capture card with camera inputs. So basically you have your computer with some sort of parameters, storage and so on. You install the software which will be collecting video footage from the cameras, but you also need a capture card to which you connect those BNC cables. Hardware setup for the DVR is basically the same as for NVR. Please look at the lesson about hardware setup for NVR. Well, there's not much to it except connect power and a couple of cables. The only difference is that for the DVR you must connect coax cables to the BNC inputs on the back of the DVR. And here we have an example of the DVR with 8 inputs and one video output for some sort of spot monitor, VGA output, HDMI output, and there's a LAN connection, RS485 possibly for PTZ, some alarm inputs and outputs, and a power connector and a power switch. So you have to connect those cables here for the cameras, depending if you have how many cameras you have. You can connect one, you can connect up to 8. You don't have to connect all of them. Then you have connecting your mouse to the USB. You connect your monitor to, I recommend HDMI, not the VGA, but if you don't have, if you have some old VGA monitor, you can connect to that. You just picture quality will be much worse. If you're not using any LAN connections with the DVR, you don't need to connect LAN. If you do, again, follow the same steps as with the NVR, how to obtain IP address and so on. You have to obviously connect your power and then switch on. And basically that's it. As for the software setup, you do exactly the same steps again as NVR. So you have to set up password, date and time, recording schedule, and recording quality. You don't have to do any further in that for initial setup. But there are some DVRs which also require mapping camera inputs with DVR channels on the screen. It is definitely in the case of Hikvision. You can connect all those cameras in the back and you will see nothing basically on your monitor unless you go to the certain menu position and you will assign basically input from the camera on the back to the position on the screen. And it is for a Hikvision, it is happening on the, you go to settings, main menu settings, and in settings you go to something what is called sorry, it's not called settings, it's called configuration, and in configuration you go to menu called live view, and there you assign basically on the left you will have your inputs, and you assign to the spot numbers on the screen of the monitor. If you once you do that and click save, you will be able to view your cameras on the screen. As for further steps, again, as I mentioned before, if you have to connect the DVR to network, follow the same steps as with connecting NVR, with that difference that you're not connecting at the moment any IP cameras. You just programming the network for the DVR itself. Thank you.